The bell rang, and when Miss Parker went to the tube, a furious voice called out in a piercing North of Ireland accent,
"Send Farrington here."
Miss Parker turned to a man who was writing at a desk. "Mr. Alleyne wants you upstairs." The man muttered, "Blast him," and pushed back his chair. When he stood up, he was tall and of great bulk. He had a hanging face, dark, wine-coloured, with fair eyebrows and moustache. His eyes bulged forward slightly, and the whites of them were dirty. He lifted up the counter and, passing by the clients, went out of the office with a heavy step. He went upstairs until he came to the second landing, where a door bore a brass plate with the inscription, "Mr. Alleyne." Here he halted, puffing with labour and vexation, and knocked. The shrill voice cried,
"Come in."
The man entered Mr. Alleyne's room. Simultaneously, Mr. Alleyne, a little man wearing gold-rimmed glasses, shot his head up over a pile of documents. The head itself was so hairless it seemed like a large egg reposing on the papers. Mr. Alleyne did not lose a moment.
"Farrington, what is the meaning of this? Why have I always to complain of you? May I ask you why you haven't made a copy of that contract between Bodley and Kerwin? I told you it must be ready by 4 o'clock.
But Mr. Shelley said, sir—"
"Mr. Shelley said, sir. You have always some excuse or another for shirking work. Let me tell you that if the contract is not copied before this evening, I'll lay the matter before Mr. Crosby. Do you hear me now?"
"Yes, sir."
"Aye. And another little matter. Understand once for all that you get a half an hour for your lunch and not an hour and a half. How many courses do you want, I'd like to know? Do you mind me now?"
"Yes, sir." Mr. Alleyne bent his head again upon his pile of papers. The man stared fixedly at the polished skull which directed the affairs of Crosby and Alleyne, gauging its fragility. A spasm of rage gripped his throat for a moment, and then passed, leaving after it a sharp sensation of thirst. The man recognized the sensation, and felt that he must have a good night's drinking. The middle of the month was past, and if you could get the copy done in time, Mr. Alleyne might give him an order on the cashier. He returned to his desk in the lower office and counted the sheets which remained to be copied. He took up his pen and dipped it in the ink, but he continued to stare stupidly at the last words he had written. The evening was falling, and in a few minutes they would be lighting the gas. Then he could write. But he felt that he must slake the thirst in his throat. He passed out of the office. The chief clerk looked at him inquiringly. "It's all right, Mr. Shelley," said the man, pointing to indicate the objective of his journey. The chief clerk glanced at the hat rack, but seeing the row complete, offered no remark. As soon as he was on the landing, the man pulled a shepherd's plaid cap out of his pocket, put it on his head, and ran quickly down the rickety stairs. From the street door he walked on furtively towards the corner, and all at once dived into a doorway. He was now safe in the dark snug of O'Neill's shop, and he called out, "Here, Pat, give us a GP like a go fella." The curate brought him a glass of plain porter. The man drank it at a gulp and asked for a caraway seed. Then he put his penny on the counter and retreated out of the snug as furtively as he had entered it. The man walked back to the office, wondering whether he could finish his copy in time. On the stairs a pungent odour of perfume saluted his nose. Evidently Miss Delacour had come while he was out in O'Neill's. He crammed his cap back again into his pocket and re-entered the office, assuming an air of absent-mindedness. "Mr. Alleyne has been calling for you," said the chief clerk severely. "Where were you?" The man glanced at the two clients at the counter as if to intimate that their presence prevented him from answering. The chief clerk laughed. "I know that game. 5 times in one day is a bit— Well, you better look sharp and get a copy of our correspondence in the Delacour case for Mr. Alleyne." The man went to his desk to get what was required and then passed out of the office. He hoped Mr. Alleyne would not discover that the last 2 letters were missing. The pungent perfume lay all the way up to Mr. Alleyne's room. Miss Delacour was a middle-aged woman of Jewish appearance. Mr. Alleyne was said to be sweet on her, or on her money. She was sitting beside his desk now, and Mr. Alleyne had swivelled his chair round to face her and thrown his right foot jauntily upon his left knee. The man put the correspondence on the desk and bowed respectfully, but neither Mr. Alleyne nor Miss Delacour took any notice. The man returned to the lower office and set to work to finish his copy, but his head was not clear, and his mind wandered away to the glare of the public house, and when the clock struck 5 he had still 14 pages to write. Blast it! He couldn't finish it in time. He longed to execrate aloud, to bring his fist down on something violently. All the indignities of his life enraged him. Could he ask the cashier privately for an advance? He knew where to meet the boys, Leonard and O'Halloran and Nosey Flynn. It was a night for hot punches. His imagination had so abstracted him that his name was called twice before he answered. Mr. Alleyne and Miss Delacour were standing outside the counter, and all the clerks had turned round in anticipation of something. The man got up from his desk. Mr. Alleyne began a tirade of abuse, saying that 2 letters were missing. The man answered that he knew nothing about them, that he had made a faithful copy. "You know nothing. Of course you know nothing," said Mr. Alleyne. "Tell me," he added, glancing first for approval to the lady beside him, "do you take me for a fool? Do you think me an utter fool?" The man glanced at the little egg-shaped head, and almost before he was aware of it, his tongue had found a felicitous moment. "I don't think, sir, that's a fair question to put to me." There was a pause in the very breathing of the clerks. Everyone was astounded, the author of the witticism no less than his neighbours, and Miss Delacour, who was a stout, amiable person, began to smile broadly. Mr. Alleyne flushed to the hue of a wild rose, and he shook his fist in the man's face till it seemed to vibrate like the knob of some electric machine. "You impertinent ruffian! I'll make short work of you. Wait till you see. You'll apologise to me for your impertinence, or you'll quit the office instanter." He stood in a doorway opposite the office, watching to see if the cashier would come out alone. All the clerks passed out, and finally the cashier came out with the chief clerk. It was no use trying to say a word to him now. The man felt that his position was bad enough. He had been obliged to offer an abject apology to Mr. Alleyne for his impertinence, but he knew what a hornet's nest the office would be for him. He felt savage and thirsty and revengeful, annoyed with himself and with everyone else. He had made a proper fool of himself this time. But they had never pulled together from the first, he and Mr. Alleyne, since Mr. Alleyne had overheard him mimicking his North of Ireland accent to amuse Miss Parker. He felt his great body again aching for the comfort of the public house. He wondered if he could touch Pat in O'Neill's. He must get money somewhere or other. He had spent his last penny for the GP. Suddenly, as he was fingering his watch chain, he thought of Terry Kelly's pawn office in Fleet Street. That was the dart. Why didn't he think of it sooner? He went through the narrow alley of Temple Bar quickly, muttering to himself that they could all go to hell because he was going to have a good night of it. The clerk in Terry Kelly's said a crown, but the consignor held out for 6 shillings, and in the end the 6 shillings was allowed him. He came out of the pawn office joyfully. As he walked, he preconsidered the terms in which he would narrate the incident to the boys. "So I just looked at him. Coolly, taking my time, "I don't think that's a fair question to put to me," says I. Nosey Flynn was sitting in his usual corner of Davy Byrne's, and when he heard the story, he stood Farrington a half-an, saying it was as smart a thing as ever he heard. Farrington stood a drink in his turn. After a while O'Halloran and Paddy Leonard came in, and the story was repeated to them. O'Halloran stood tailors of malt, hot, all round, and then Farrington told the boys to polish off that and have another. When that round was over, the group, except for Nosey Flynn, left the shop. Rain was drizzling down on the cold streets, and Farrington suggested the Scotch House. The 3 men pushed past the whining match-sellers at the door and formed a little party at the counter. Leonard introduced them to a young fellow named Weathers, who was performing at the Tivoli as an acrobat. Farrington stood a drink all round. Weathers said he would take a small iris and Apollinaris. The talk became theatrical. Weathers promised to get them in behind the scenes, and he arranged to meet them later on at Mulligan's in Pulbeg Street. When the Scotch House closed, they went round to Mulligan's. They went into the parlour, and O'Halloran ordered small hot specials all round. They were all beginning to feel mellow. Farrington was just standing another round when Weathers came back. Much to Farrington's relief, he drank a glass of bitter this time. Funds were getting low. Presently 2 young women with big hats and a young man in a check suit came in. Weathers saluted them and told the company that they were out of the Tivoli. Farrington's eyes wandered at every moment in the direction of one of the young women. There was something striking in her appearance. Farrington gazed admiringly at the plump arm which she moved very often and with much grace, and when after a little time she answered his gaze, he admired still more her large, dark, brown eyes. She glanced at him once or twice, and when the party was leaving the room, she brushed against his chair and said, "Oh, pardon," in a London accent. He cursed his want of money, and cursed all the rounds he had stood, particularly the whiskies and Apollinaris which he had stood to Weathers. If there was one thing that he hated, it was a sponge. He was so angry that he lost count of the conversation of his friends. When Paddy Leonard called him, he found that they were talking about feats of strength. Weathers was showing his biceps muscle and boasting so much that the other two had called on Farrington to uphold the national honour. Farrington pulled up his sleeve accordingly and showed his biceps muscle. Finally, it was agreed to have a trial of strength. The table was cleared, and the two men rested their elbows on it, clasping hands. After about 30 seconds, Weathers brought his opponent's hand slowly down onto the table. Farrington's dark, wine-coloured face flushed darker still with anger and humiliation. "Come on again," he said. "The two best out of 3. The trial began again. The veins stood out on Farrington's forehead, and the pallor of Weathers' complexion changed to peony. Their hands and arms trembled under the stress. After a long struggle, Weathers again brought his opponent's hand onto the table. The curate, who was standing beside the table, nodded towards the victor and said, "Ah, that's the knack." "What the hell do you know about it?" said Farrington fiercely. "Shh, shh," said O'Halloran, observing the violent expression of Farrington's face. A very sullen-faced man stood at the corner of O'Connell Bridge waiting for the Sandymount tram. He was full of smouldering anger and revengefulness. He cursed everything. His fury nearly choked him. His tram let him down at Shelburne Road, and he steered his great body home. When he went inside, he found the kitchen empty and the fire nearly out. He bawled upstairs, "Ada! Ada!" His wife was a little sharp-faced woman who bullied her husband when he was sober and was bullied by him when he was drunk. They had 5 children. A little boy came running down the stairs. "Who is that?" said the man, peering through the darkness.
"Me, Pa."
"Who are you, Charlie?"
"No, Pa, Tom."
"Where's your mother?"
"She's out at the chapel, Pa."
"That's right. Did she think of leaving any dinner for me?"
"Yes, Pa, I—"
"Light the lamp." "What do you mean by having the place in darkness?" The man sat down heavily in one of the chairs. When the lamp was lit, he banged his fist on the table and shouted, "What's for my dinner?"
"I'm going to cook it, Pa," said the little boy.
The man jumped up furiously and pointed at the fire.
"On that fire! You let the fire out! By God, I'll teach you to do that again!"
He seized a walking stick.
"I'll teach you to let the fire out,"
he said, rolling up his sleeve in order to give his arm free play. The little boy cried, "Oh, Pa!" and ran whimpering round the table, but the man followed him and caught him by the coat. The little boy looked about him wildly, but seeing no way of escape, fell upon his knees.
"Take that, you little whelp,"
said the man, striking at him vigorously with the stick. The boy uttered a squeal of pain as the stick cut his thigh. He clasped his hands together and his voice shook with fright. "Oh, Pa!" he cried. "Don't beat me, Pa! And I'll say a Hail Mary for you. I'll say a Hail Mary for you, Pa. If you don't beat me, I'll say a Hail Mary." The matron had given her leave to go as soon as the women's tea was over, and Maria looked forward to her evening out. The kitchen was spick and span. The cook said you could see yourself in the big copper boilers. The fire was nice and bright, and on one of the side tables were 4 big barmbracks. They'd been cut into thick, even slices and were ready to be handed round at tea. Maria had cut them herself. Maria was a very, very small person indeed, but she had a very long nose and a very long chin. She talked a little through her nose, always soothingly. "Yes, my dear," and "No, my dear." She was always sent for when the women quarrelled, and always succeeded in making peace. One day the matron had said to her, "Maria, you are a veritable peacemaker." And Ginger Mooney was always saying what she wouldn't do to the dummy who had charge of the irons if it wasn't for Maria. Everyone was so fond of Maria. The women would have their tea at 6 o'clock, and she would be able to get away before 7. From Ball's Bridge to the Pillar, 20 minutes. From the Pillar to Drumcondra, 20 minutes. And 20 minutes to buy the things. She would be there before 8. She took out her purse with the silver clasps and read again the words, "A present from Belfast." She was fond of that purse because Joe had brought it to her 5 years before, when he and Alfie had gone to Belfast on a Whit-Monday trip. In the purse were 2 half-crowns and some coppers. She would have 5 shillings clear after paying tram fare. What a nice evening they would have, all the children singing. Only she hoped that Joe wouldn't come in drunk. He was so different when he took any drink. Often he had wanted her to go and live with them, but she would have felt herself in the way, though Joe's wife was ever so nice with her, and she had become accustomed to the life of the laundry. Joe was a good fellow. She had nursed him and Alfie too, and Joe used often to say, "Mama is Mama, but Maria is my proper mother." After the break-up at home, the boys had got her that position in the Dublin by lamplight laundry, and she liked it. She used to have such a bad opinion of Protestants, but now she thought they were very nice people. A little quiet and serious, but still very nice people to live with. When the cook told her everything was ready, she went into the women's room and began to pull the big bell. In a few minutes the women began to come in, wiping their steaming hands in their petticoats. They settled down before their huge mugs, which the cook and the dummy filled up with hot tea, already mixed with milk and sugar in huge tin cans. Maria superintended the distribution of the barmbrack. There was a great deal of laughing and joking during the meal. Lizzie Fleming said Maria was sure to get the ring, and though Fleming had said that for so many Hallow Eves, Maria had to laugh and say she didn't want any ring or man either, and when she laughed her grey-green eyes sparkled with disappointed shyness, and the tip of her nose nearly met the tip of her chin. Then Ginger Mooney lifted her mug of tea and proposed Maria's health, while all the other women clattered with their mugs on the table, and she said she was sorry she hadn't a sup of porter to drink it in. And Maria laughed again, and her minute body nearly shook itself asunder, because she knew that Mooney meant well, though of course she had the notions of a common woman. But wasn't Maria glad when the women had finished their tea? She went into her little bedroom, and remembering that the next morning was a mass morning, changed the hand of the alarm from 7 to 6. Then she took off her working skirt and her house boots, and laid her best skirt out on the bed and her tiny dress boots beside the foot of the bed. She changed her blouse, too, and as she stood before the mirror, she thought of how she used to dress for Mass on Sunday morning when she was a young girl, and she looked with quaint affection at the diminutive body which she had so often adorned. In spite of its years, she found it a nice, tidy little body. When she got outside, the streets were shining with rain, and she was glad of her old brown waterproof. The tram was full, and she had to sit on the little stool at the end of the car, facing all the people, with her toes barely touching the floor. She arranged in her mind all she was going to do, and thought how much better it was to be independent and to have your own money in your pocket. She hoped they would have a nice evening, but she could not help thinking what a pity it was Alfie and Joe were not speaking. They were always falling out now, but when they were boys they used to be the best of friends. But such was life. She got out of her tram at the Pillar and ferreted her way quickly among the crowds. She went into Downes's cake shop and bought a dozen of mixed penny cakes. Then she thought, what else would she buy? She wanted to buy something really nice. They would be sure to have plenty of apples and nuts. She decided to buy some plum cake, but Downes's plum cake had not enough almond icing on it, so she went over to a shop in Henry Street. Here she was a long time in suiting herself, and the stylish young lady behind the counter, who was evidently a little annoyed by her, asked her was it a wedding cake she wanted to buy. That made Maria blush and smile. But the young lady took it all very seriously, and finally cut a thick slice of plum cake, parcelled it up, and said, 2 and 4, please. She thought she would have to stand in the Drumcondra tram, but an elderly gentleman made room for her. He wore a brown hard hat and had a greyish moustache. Maria thought he was a colonel-looking gentleman, and she reflected how much more polite he was than the young men who simply stared straight before them. The gentleman began to chat with her about Hallow Eve. He supposed the bag was full of good things for the little ones, and said it was only right that the youngsters should enjoy themselves while they were young. Maria agreed with him and favoured him with demure nods and hems. He was very nice with her, and when she was getting out at the canal bridge she thanked him, and he bowed to her and raised his hat, and she thought how easy it was to know a gentleman even when he has a drop taken. Everybody said, "Oh, here's Maria," when she came to Joe's house. Joe was there, having come home from business, and all the children had their Sunday dresses on. There were 2 big girls in from next door, and games were going on. Maria gave the bag of cakes to the eldest boy, Alfie, to divide, and Mrs. Donnelly said it was too good of her to bring such a big bag of cakes, and made all the children say, "Thanks, Maria." But Maria said she'd brought something special for Papa and Mamma, and she began to look for her plum cake. She tried in Downes's bag, and then in the pockets of her waterproof, and then on the hall stand, but nowhere could she find it. Everybody had a solution for the mystery, and Mrs. Donnelly said it was plain that Maria had left it in the tram. Maria, remembering how confused the gentleman with the greyish moustache had made her, coloured with shame and disappointment. At the thought of the failure of her little surprise, and of the 2 and 4pence she had thrown away for nothing, she nearly cried outright. But Joe said it didn't matter, and made her sit down by the fire. He was very nice with her. He told her all that went on in his office, repeating for her a smart answer which he had made to the manager. Mrs. Donnelly played the piano for the children, and they danced and sang. Then the 2 next-door girls handed round the nuts. Nobody could find the nutcrackers, and Joe was nearly getting cross over it, and asked how did they expect Maria to crack nuts without a nutcracker. But Maria said she didn't like nuts, and that they weren't to bother about her. Then Joe asked would she take a bottle of stout, and Mrs. Donnelly said there was port wine too, if she would prefer that. Maria said she would rather they didn't ask her to take anything, but Joe insisted. So Maria let him have his way, and they sat by the fire talking over old times, and Maria thought she would put in a good word for Alfie. But Joe cried that God might strike him stone dead if he ever spoke a word to his brother again. Mrs. Donnelly told her husband it was a great shame for him to speak that way of his own flesh and blood, but Joe said Alfie was no brother of his. But he said he would not lose his temper on account of the night it was, and asked his wife to open some more stout. The 2 next-door girls had arranged some Hallow Eve games, and soon everything was merry again. Maria was delighted to see Joe and his wife in such good spirits. The next-door girls put some saucers on the table, and then led the children up to the table blindfold. One got the prayer book, and the other 3 got the water. And when one of the next-door girls got the ring, Mrs. Donnelly shook her finger at the blushing girl as much as to say, "Oh, I know all about it." They insisted then on blindfolding Maria and leading her up to the table to see what she would get. And while they were putting on the bandage, Maria laughed and laughed again till the tip of her nose nearly met the tip of her chin. They led her up to the table amid laughing and joking, and she put her hand out in the air as she was told to do. She moved her hand about here and there and descended on one of the saucers. She felt a soft, wet substance with her fingers, and was surprised that nobody spoke or took off her bandage. There was a pause for a few seconds, and then a great deal of scuffling and whispering. Somebody said something about the garden, and at last Mrs. Donnelly said something very cross to one of the next-door girls, and told her to throw it out at once. That was no play. Maria understood that it was wrong that time, and so she had to do it over again. And this time she got the prayer book. After that, Mrs. Donnelly played Miss MacLeod's reel for the children, and Joe made Maria take a glass of wine. Soon they were all quite merry again, and Mrs. Donnelly said Maria would enter a convent before the year was out because she had got the prayer book. Maria had never seen Joe so nice to her as he was that night, so full of pleasant talk and reminiscences. She said they were all very good to her. At last the children grew tired, and Joe asked Maria would she not sing some little song before she went, one of the old songs. Mrs. Donnelly said, "Do, please, Maria," and so Maria had to get up and stand beside the piano. Mrs. Donnelly bade the children be quiet and listen to Maria's song. Then she played the prelude and said, "Now, Maria." And Maria, blushing very much, began to sing in a tiny, quavering voice. She sang, "I dreamt that I dwelt," and when she came to the second verse, she sang again the first. "I dreamt that I dwelt in marble halls, with vassals and serfs at my side, and of all who assembled within those walls, that I was the hope and the pride. I had riches too great to count, could boast of a high ancestral name, but I also dreamt, which pleased me most, that you loved me still the same." But no one tried to show her her mistake, and when she had ended her song, Joe was very much moved. He said that there was no time like the long ago, and no music for him like poor old Balfe, whatever other people might say. And his eyes filled up so much with tears that he could not find what he was looking for, and in the end he had to ask his wife to tell him where the corkscrew was. Mr. James Duffy lived in Chapelizod because he wished to live as far as possible from the city, and because he found all the other suburbs of Dublin mean, modern, and pretentious. He lived in an old, sombre house, and from his windows he could look into the disused distillery or upwards along the river on which Dublin is built. He had himself bought every article of furniture in the room: an iron bedstead, an iron washstand, 4 cane chairs, a clothes rack, and a square table on which lay a double desk. A bookcase had been made in an alcove. Writing materials were always on the desk. Mr. Duffy abhorred anything which betokened physical or mental disorder. His face, which carried the entire tale of his years, was of the brown tint of Dublin streets. On his large head grew dry black hair, and a tawny moustache did not quite cover an unamiable mouth. His cheekbones gave his face a harsh character, but there was no harshness in the eyes, which gave the impression of a man ever alert to greet a redeeming instinct. He never gave alms to beggars, and walked firmly, carrying a stout hazel. He had been for many years cashier of a private bank in Baggot Street. Every morning he came in from Chapelizod by tram, At midday he went to Dan Burke's and took his lunch, a bottle of beer and a small trayful of arrowroot biscuits. At 4 o'clock he was set free. He dined in an eating-house in George's Street. His liking for Mozart's music brought him sometimes to an opera or a concert. These were the only dissipations of his life. He had neither companions nor friends, church nor creed. He lived his spiritual life without any communion with others, visiting his relatives at Christmas and escorting them to the cemetery when they died. He performed these two social duties for old dignity's sake, but conceded nothing further to the conventions which regulate the civic life. One evening he found himself sitting beside two ladies in the rotunda. The house, thinly peopled, gave distressing prophecy of failure. The lady who sat next him looked round at the deserted house and then said, "What a pity there's such a poor house. It's so hard on people to have to sing to empty benches." He took the remark as an invitation to talk. He was surprised that she seemed so little awkward. When he learned that the young girl beside her was her daughter, he judged her to be a year or so younger than himself. Her face, which must have been handsome, had remained intelligent. He met her again a few weeks afterwards at a concert in Earlsfort Terrace, and seized the moments when her daughter's attention was diverted to become intimate. She alluded once or twice to her husband, but her tone was not such as to make the allusion a warning. Her name was Mrs. Sinico. Her husband was captain of a mercantile boat plying between Dublin and Holland, and they had one child. Meeting her a third time by accident, he found courage to make an appointment. She came. This was the first of many meetings. They met always in the evening and chose the most quiet quarters for their walks together. Mr. Duffy, however, had a distaste for underhand ways, and he forced her to ask him to her house. Captain Sinico encouraged his visits, thinking that his daughter's hand was in question. He had dismissed his wife so sincerely from his gallery of pleasures that he did not suspect that anyone else would take an interest in her. As the husband was often away, Mr. Duffy had many opportunities of enjoying the lady's society. Neither he nor she had had any such adventure before, and neither was conscious of any incongruity. Little by little he entangled his thoughts with hers. He lent her books, provided her with ideas, shared his intellectual life with her. Sometimes in return for his theories she gave out some fact of her own life. With almost maternal solicitude she urged him to let his nature open to the full. She became his confessor. He told her that for some time he had assisted at the meetings of an Irish socialist party, where he had felt himself a unique figure amidst a score of sober workmen. But he had discontinued his attendances. The workmen's discussions, he said, were too timorous. The interest they took in the question of wages was inordinate. No social revolution, he told her, would be likely to strike Dublin for some centuries. She asked him why he did not write out his thoughts. For what? He asked her with careful scorn. To submit himself to the criticisms of an obtuse middle class which entrusted its morality to policemen and its fine arts to impresarios. He went often to her little cottage outside Dublin. Little by little, as their thoughts entangled, they spoke of subjects less remote. Her companionship was like a warm soil about an exotic. Many times she allowed the dark to fall, refraining from lighting the lamp. The dark, discreet room, their isolation, the music that still vibrated in their ears, united them. This union exalted him, emotionalized his mental life. The end of these discourses was that one night during which he had shown signs of unusual excitement, Mrs. Sinico had caught up his hand passionately and pressed it to her cheek. Mr. Duffy was very much surprised. Her interpretation of his words disillusioned him. He did not visit her for a week. Then he wrote to her asking her to meet him. They met near the park gate. It was cold autumn weather, but they wandered up and down the roads of the park for nearly 3 hours. They agreed to break off their intercourse. Every bond, he said, is a bond to sorrow. When they came out of the park, they walked in silence towards the tram, but here she began to tremble so violently that, fearing another collapse on her part, he bade her goodbye quickly and left her. A few days later he received a parcel containing his books and music. 4 years passed. Mr. Duffy returned to his even way of life. He wrote seldom in the sheaf of papers which lay in his desk. One of his sentences, written 2 months after his last interview with Mrs. Sinico, read, "Love between man and man is impossible, because there must not be sexual intercourse. And friendship between man and woman is impossible, because there must be sexual intercourse." He kept away from concerts lest he should meet her. And still every morning he went into the city by tram, and every evening walked home, after having dined moderately in George's Street, and read the evening paper for dessert. One evening, as he was about to put a morsel of corned beef and cabbage into his mouth, his hand stopped. His eyes fixed themselves on a paragraph in the evening paper. He replaced the morsel of food on his plate and read the paragraph attentively. Then he drank a glass of water, pushed his plate to one side, doubled the paper down before and between his elbows, and read the paragraph over and over again. Then he paid his bill and went out. He walked along quickly through the November twilight, his stout hazel stick striking the ground regularly. When he reached his house, he went up at once to his bedroom, and taking the paper from his pocket, read the paragraph again. Death of a lady at Sydney Parade. A painful case. Today at the City of Dublin Hospital, the deputy coroner held an inquest on the body of Mrs. Emily Sinico, aged 43 years, who was killed at Sydney Parade Station yesterday evening. The evidence showed that the deceased lady was knocked down by the 10 o'clock train from Kingstown. P. Dunn, porter, stated that as the train was about to start, he observed a woman attempting to cross the lines. He shouted, but she was caught by the buffer of the engine and fell to the ground. Dr. Halpin, house surgeon of the city hospital, stated that the deceased had fractured ribs and the right side of the head had been injured in the fall. The injuries were not sufficient to have caused death. Death, in his opinion, had been probably due to shock and sudden failure of the heart's action. Mr. H.B. Finlay, from the railway company, expressed his deep regret at the accident. He said that the deceased had been in the habit of crossing the lines late at night, and in view of certain other circumstances, he did not think the railway officials were to blame. Captain Sinico also gave evidence. He stated that the deceased was his wife. They had been married for 22 years and had lived happily until about 2 years ago, when his wife began to be rather intemperate in her habits. Miss Mary Sinico said that of late her mother had been in the habit of going out at night to buy spirits. She had tried to reason with her mother and had induced her to join a league. The deputy coroner said it was a most painful case. No blame was attached to anyone. Mr. Duffy raised his eyes from the paper and gazed out of his window. What an end. The cautious words of a reporter, won over to conceal the details of a commonplace vulgar death, attacked his stomach. Not merely had she degraded herself, she had degraded him. He saw the squalid tract of her vice, miserable and malodorous. His soul's companion. He thought of the hobbling wretches whom he had seen carrying bottles to be filled by the barman. Just God, what an end! But that she could have sunk so low. Was it possible he had deceived himself so utterly about her? He remembered her outburst of that night, and interpreted it in a harsher sense than he had ever done. He had no difficulty now in approving of the course he had taken. As the light failed and his memory began to wander, he thought her hand touched his. The shock which had first attacked his stomach was now attacking his nerves. He put on his overcoat and went out. When he came to the public house at Chapelizod Bridge, he went in and ordered a hot punch. The shop was very quiet. As he sat there living over his life with her, and evoking alternately the two images in which he now conceived her, he realized that she was dead, that she had become a memory. He began to feel ill at ease. He asked himself what else could he have done. He could not have carried on a comedy of deception with her. He could not have lived with her openly. He had done what seemed to him best. How was he to blame? Now that she was gone, he understood how lonely her life must have been, sitting night after night alone in that room. His life would be lonely too until he too died, became a memory, if anyone remembered him. It was after 9 o'clock when he left the shop. The night was cold and gloomy. He entered the park and walked through the bleak alleys where they had walked 4 years before. She seemed to be near him in the darkness. At moments he seemed to feel her voice touch his ear, her hand touch his. Why had he withheld life from her? Why had he sentenced her to death? When he gained the crest of the magazine hill, he halted and looked down the slope, and he saw some human figures lying. Those venal and furtive loves filled him with despair. He felt that he had been outcast from life's feast. One human being had seemed to love him, and he had denied her life and happiness. He had sentenced her to ignominy, a death of shame. He turned his eyes to the river. Beyond he saw a goods train winding out of Kingsbridge station. It passed out of sight, but still he heard in his ears the laborious drone of the engine reiterating the syllables of her name. He turned back the way he had come, the rhythm of the engine pounding in his ears. He halted under a tree and allowed the rhythm to die away. He could not feel her near him in the darkness, nor her voice touch his ear. He waited for some minutes, listening. He could hear nothing. The night was perfectly silent. He listened again. Perfectly silent. He felt that he was alone. Old Jack raked the cinders together with a piece of cardboard and spread them judiciously over the whitening dome of coals. When the dome was thinly covered, his face lapsed into darkness, but as he set himself to fan the fire again, his crouching shadow ascended the opposite wall and his face slowly re-emerged into light. It was an old man's face, very bony and hairy. The moist blue eyes blinked at the fire, and the moist mouth fell open at times, munching once or twice mechanically when it closed. When the cinders had caught, he laid the piece of cardboard against the wall, sighed, and said, "That's better now, Mr. O'Connor." Mr. O'Connor, a grey-haired young man whose face was disfigured by many blotches and pimples, had just brought the tobacco for a cigarette into a shapely cylinder, but when spoken to, he undid his handiwork meditatively. Then he began to roll the tobacco again meditatively, and after a moment's thought decided to lick the paper. "Did Mr. Tierney say when he'd be back?" he asked in a husky falsetto. "He didn't say." Mr. O'Connor put his cigarette into his mouth and began to search his pockets. He took out a pack of pasteboard cards. "I'll get you a match," said the old man. "Never mind, this'll do," said Mr. O'Connor. He selected one of the cards and read what was printed on it. "Municipal Elections, Royal Exchange Ward. Mr. Richard J. Tierney, PLG, respectfully solicits the favour of your vote and influence at the coming election in the Royal Exchange Ward." Mr. O'Connor had been engaged by Tierney's agent to canvass one part of the ward, but as the weather was inclement and his boots slid in the wet, he spent a great part of the day sitting by the fire in the committee room in Wicklow Street with Jack, the old caretaker. It was the 6th of October. Mr. O'Connor tore a strip off the card and, lighting it, lit his cigarette. As he did so, the flame lit up a leaf of dark, glossy ivy in the lapel of his coat. The old man watched attentively while his companion smoked. "Ah, yes," he said, continuing. "It's hard to know what way to bring up children. I sent him to the Christian Brothers, and I done what I could for him, and there he goes, boozing about. The mother, you know, she cocks him up with this and that. That's what ruins children," said Mr. O'Connor. "What age is he?" 19. "Why don't you put him to something?" "Sure, Ahmed, I never done it, the drunken bowsy, ever since he left school. But sure, it's worse whenever he gets a job. He drinks it all." Mr. O'Connor shook his head in sympathy, and the old man fell silent. Someone opened the door of the room and called out, "Hello, is this a Freemasons meeting?" "Is that you, Hines?" asked Mr. O'Connor. "Yes, what are you doing in the dark?" said Mr. Hines. He was a tall, slender young man with a brown moustache. Imminent little drops of rain hung at the brim of his hat, and the collar of his jacket coat was turned up. "Well, Matt," he said to Mr. O'Connor, "how goes it?" Mr. O'Connor shook his head. The old man left the hearth and, after stumbling about the room, returned with 2 candlesticks which he thrust, one after the other, into the fire and carried to the table. A denuded room came into view. The walls were bare except for a copy of an election address. In the middle of the room was a table on which papers were heaped. Mr. Hines leaned against the mantelpiece. "Has he paid you yet?" "Not yet," said Mr. O'Connor. "I hope to God he'll not leave us in the lurch tonight." Mr. Hines laughed. "Oh, he'll pay you, never fear." The old man returned to his seat by the fire, saying, "He has it anyway. Not like the other tinker, Colgan." "Is it because Colgan's a working man you say that? What's the difference between a good honest bricklayer and a publican, eh? Hasn't the working man as good a right to be in the corporation as anyone else? Aye, and a better right than those shoneens that are always hat in hand before any fellow with a handle to his name. Isn't that so, Matt?" said Mr. Hines, addressing Mr. O'Connor. "I think you're right. One man is a plain, honest man with no hunker sliding about him. He goes in to represent the labour classes. The fellow you're working for only wants to get some job or other." "Of course the working classes should be represented," said the old man. "The working man," said Mr. Hines, "gets all the kicks and no halfpence. But it's labour produces everything. The working man is not looking for fat jobs for his sons and nephews. The working man is not going to drag the honour of Dublin in the mud to please a German monarch." "How's that?" said the old man. "Don't you know they want to present an address of welcome to Edward Rex if he comes here next year? What do we want kowtowing to a foreign king?" "Our man won't vote for the address," said Mr. O'Connor. "He goes in on the nationalist ticket." "Won't he?" said Mr. Hines. "I know him. Is it Tricky Dicky Tierney? By God, perhaps you're right, Joe. Anyway, I wish he'd turn up with the Spondulics." The 3 men fell silent. The old man began to rake more cinders together. Mr. Hines took off his hat and then turned down the collar of his coat, displaying, as he did so, an ivy leaf in the lapel. "If this man was alive," he said, pointing to the leaf, "we'd have no talk of an address of welcome." "Musha, God be with them times," said the old man. The room was silent again. Then a bustling little man with a snuffling nose pushed in the door. He walked over to the fire. "No money, boys," he said. "Sit down here, Mr. Henchy," said the old man, offering him his chair. Mr. Henchy nodded curtly to Mr. Hines and then sat down. "Did you serve Ainger Street?" he asked Mr. O'Connor. "Yes." "Did you call on Grimes?" "I did." "Well, how does he stand?" "He wouldn't promise. He asked me who the nominators were, and I told him. I mentioned Father Burke's name, but I think he'll be all right." Mr. Henchy began to rub his hands over the fire at a terrific speed. "For the love of God, Jack, bring us a bit of coal." The old man went out of the room. "It's no go," said Mr. Henchy, shaking his head. "I asked the little shoeboy, but he said, 'Oh, now, Mr. Henchy, when I see the work going properly, I won't forget you may be sure.' Mean little tinker. Usha, how could he be anything else?" "What did I tell you, Matt?" said Mr. Hines. "Tricky Dicky Tierney." "Oh, he's as tricky as they make him," said Mr. Henchy. He hasn't got those little pig's eyes for nothing. Blast his soul. Couldn't he pay up like a man instead of, "Oh, now, Mr. Henchy, I've spent a lot of money." Me little schoolboy of hell. I suppose he forgets the time his little old father kept a hand-me-down shop in Mary's Lane. "Is that a fact?" asked Mr. O'Connor. "God, yes," said Mr. Henchy. "Did you never hear that? And the men used to go on Sunday morning before the houses were open to buy a waistcoat or a trousers. My, yeah. But Tricky Dicky's little old father always had a tricky little black bottle in the corner. Do you mind now? That's where he first saw the light." The old man returned with a few lumps of coal which he placed on the fire. "That's a nice how do you do," said Mr. O'Connor. "How does he expect us to work for him if he won't stump up?" "I expect to find the bailiffs in the hall when I go home," said Mr. Henchy. Mr. Hines laughed and made ready to leave. "It'll be all right when King Eddie comes. Well, boys, I'm off for the present. See you later. Bye." Mr. Henchy waited a few moments and then nodded in the direction of the door. "Tell me, what brings our friend in here?" "Hush, poor Joe," said Mr. O'Connor, throwing the end of his cigarette into the fire. "He's hard up like the rest of us." Mr. Henchy snuffled vigorously and spat so copiously that he nearly put out the fire, which uttered a hissing protest. "I think he's a man from the other camp," he said. "He's a spy of Colgan's, if you ask me. Just go round and try and find out how they're getting on. They won't suspect you. Do you twig?" Poor Joe was a decent skin," said Mr. O'Connor. "His father was a decent, respectable man," Mr. Henchy admitted. "Old Larry Hines. But I'm greatly afraid our friend is not 19 carat. "I don't know," said Mr. O'Connor dubiously as he took out cigarette papers and tobacco. "I think Joe Hines is a straight man. He's a clever chap, too, with the pen. Do you remember that thing he wrote?" "Some of these hillsiders and Fenians are a bit too clever, if you ask me," said Mr. Henchy. "I believe half of them are in the pay of the castle." "There's no knowing," said the old man. But I know it for a fact," said Mr. Henchy. "They're castle hacks. I don't say Hines. But there's a certain little nobleman with a cock eye. You know the patriot I'm alluding to." Mr. O'Connor nodded. "There's a lineal descendant of Major Sir for you, if you like." There was a knock at the door. "Come in," said Mr. Henchy. A person resembling a poor clergyman or a poor actor appeared in the doorway. His black clothes were tightly buttoned on his short body, and he wore a round hat of hard black felt. His face had the appearance of damp yellow cheese, save where two rosy spots indicated the cheekbones. "Oh, Father Keown," said Mr. Henchy, jumping up from his chair. "Come in." "Oh, no," said Father Keown quickly, pursing his lips as if he were addressing a child. "Don't let me disturb you now. I'm just looking for Mr. Fanning." "He's round at the Black Eagle," said Mr. Henchy. "But won't you come in and sit down a minute?" No, thank you. It was just a little business matter," said Father Keown. "Thank you indeed." He retreated from the doorway, and Mr. Henchy, seizing one of the candlesticks, went to light him downstairs. "Oh, don't trouble, I beg. No, but the stairs is so dark." "All right, thanks." Mr. Henchy returned with the candlestick and put it on the table. He sat down again at the fire. "Tell me, John," said Mr. O'Connor, lighting his cigarette with another pasteboard card, "what is he exactly?" "Ask me an easier one," said Mr. Henchy. "Fanning and himself seem very thick. They're often in Cavanaugh's together. Is he a priest at all?" Yes, I believe so. I think he's what you call a black sheep." "Is he attached to any chapel or church?" "No," said Mr. Henchy. "I think he's travelling on his own account. God forgive me," he added, "I thought he was the dozen of stout." "Is there any chance of a drink itself?" asked Mr. O'Connor. "I asked that little shoeboy 3 times," said Mr. Henchy. "Would he send up a dozen of stout? I asked him again now. He was leaning on the counter of the Black Eagle, having a deep goster with Alderman Cowley. I waited till I caught his eye and said, 'About that little matter I was speaking to you about.' 'That'll be all right, Mr. H,' he said. Yeah, sure, the little hop of me thumb has forgotten all about it." "There's some deal on in that quarter," said Mr. O'Connor thoughtfully. "I saw the 3 of them hard at it yesterday in Suffolk Street." "I think I know the little game they're at," said Mr. Henchy. "You must owe the city fathers money nowadays if you want to be made Lord Mayor. Then they'll make you Lord Mayor. Begod, I'm thinking seriously of becoming a city father myself. What do you think? Would I do for the job?" Mr. O'Connor laughed. "So far as owing money goes, "Driving out of the mansion house," said Mr. Henchy, "in all me vermin, with Jack here standing up behind me in a powdered wig, eh? And make me your private secretary, John. Yes, and I'll make Father Keown me private chaplain. We'll have a family party." "Faith, Mr. Henchy," said the old man, "you'd keep up better style than some of them. I was talking one day to old Keegan, the porter. And how do you like your new master, Pat?" says I to him. "You haven't much entertaining now," says I. "Entertaining," says he. "He'd live on the smell of an oil rag. And you know what he told me? Now, I declare to God I didn't believe him." "What?" said Mr. Henchy and Mr. O'Connor. "He told me, what do you think of a Lord Mayor of Dublin sending out for a pound of chops for his dinner? How's that for high living?" says he. "Wish you, says I. "A pound of chops," says he, "coming into the mansion house. Wish you," says I. "What kind of people is going at all now?" At this point there was a knock at the door, and a boy put in his head. "What is it?" said the old man. "From the Black Eagle," said the boy, walking in sideways and depositing a basket on the floor with a noise of shaken bottles.